And welcome to Books Between Bites. I'm Becky Hogue, and my parents started this program about 38 years ago. We missed a couple of seasons during COVID, and we appreciate you coming out in this weather today. I'm sure a lot of people looked out the window and said, but the good news is that Barb is over here videotaping the program for BATV. And this program will be posted on their YouTube website as soon as I get the link in the next week or so. I put the link on our website that's on the program here, and then you can watch it and share it with any others that weren't able to make it today. I have a clipboard in the back on the left side. If you want to be on our mailing list, email. I send out a notice once a month just about the next program. A couple of things I wanted to announce. So our December program with Valerie Blaine is going to be moved up a week to kind of avoid right into Christmas, so it's December 12th. And the programs are in the back if you want to look at that. And then we added a program for January 30th. Marnie Mamaga and Mary Parks are going to have their children's book. They were here last season with their first book, and now we made a special extra day to celebrate that the next book came out. So there's a couple of flyers in the back, but that will be Thursday, January 30th. It's on our website, and we'll be continuing to advertise that. So now I want to introduce Kristen Schultz from the library, who's going to do the introductions of our speaker today.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you for braving the first snowfall of the season. Recognizing that this month was Veterans Day, I thought it would be good to have someone who served our country speak to us this month. And Randall Niznick is a Batavia resident and a Navy veteran. Randy served 23 years in the Seabees, who are the construction workers who build the infrastructure to keep the war effort moving. And during his time, Randy also deployed on 2 humanitarian missions, which had a direct impact on him and instilled a strong sense of purpose and service. He wrote his book In Service to Others, a U.S. Navy Seabees journey, to memorialize his military service for his family, but also make those experiences accessible to the general public, offering insights into the profound meaning of service, regardless of the capacity in which it is rendered. Now he works as a professional services executive in the corporate real estate services industry. And outside of work, he loves gardening, cooking, baking, and playing the drums. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for everybody for, again, braving the little bit of snow that we have going on. For those that are from the area, though, we know that this is just a little teaser. Nothing too crazy out there, but I do appreciate everybody coming out. So first, I want to thank Christy and Misty. Misty's not here, but Misty kind of does the social media presence for the library, and both Kristen and Misty were awesome about marketing and just kind of putting it out to the community of Batavia, the Books Between Bites, right? I know there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to put these together every single month. This does not go the whole year. I think most people know this only goes for a few months. It's not the whole year, but there's still a lot of effort put into these, so I appreciate all of the efforts that go into that. And then, of course, I want to thank every one of you again for coming out and braving this crazy snow and crazy weather, for being here today. I do truly feel blessed to be able to kind of present you my book writing experience. So The audience is a little bit different than I thought, but I'm gonna stay on script, but I may go off script. So my agenda was to kind of talk about my book writing experience, some of the lessons learned. So first thing I wanted to do though, before we get into that is, well, first let me give also a big shout out to BATV. So thank you. The media people always kind of are in the back corner. Nobody ever really gives them any credit, but we know what you do is so invaluable to recording these sessions and then putting them out so a greater audience can be reached outside of this little room that we're at today. So thank you, BATV, for all you do to support these events with your media support. First of all, I want to ask, and I know we have a few, so if you're a veteran, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind having you stand up or raise your hand, whatever you're most comfortable with. So any veterans? We're always so humble, right? Always so humble. So thank you all for your service. I know I was talking to this gentleman, Marine chaplain. You know, the chaplain corps is a whole different part of the service that, you know, not a whole lot of people talk about, but it is so vitally important, especially during times of war, or my experiences with humanitarian efforts and disaster recovery efforts where you're seeing things that nothing could really prepare you for. Having a chaplain and somebody to talk to stay close to your faith and understand that there's a greater purpose for what we're doing here is always, always so important. So thank you, sir, for being a chaplain. He was a chaplain for the Marine Corps, stationed out of Camp Pendleton. We were just having some small talk out there in the lobby. And I know Karen is Army. So, you know, female veterans too, right? Female veterans, we're getting a lot better, but female veterans don't always get the love either. It's, you know, but there's plenty of female veterans out there, and they do just as much as anybody else to support and basically protect our freedoms, right? So let's get into it. So a little bit about me and my family. So first off, my wife is in the very back, Sherry, and my oldest is in the back, Nathan. My other two are in school. So I have a middle schooler, Luke, and I have a Gianna, who's 10, who's in J.B. Nelson. So Sherry and I have been married 23 years, and we have, of course, our 3 kids. We met when I was working as a Navy recruiter out of Des Plaines, Illinois. So Sherry's originally from Wooddale, and we met, and there's a whole story behind that that's in the book of how we met and how that came together. It's chapter 7. If anybody knows me and knows how I talk about this book, I always say, just read chapter 7. That's the only chapter you need to read. There's a reason behind that. But anyway, so why Batavia? Like, what brought us here to Batavia? So I was transitioning out of the military in 2013, and we were living in Wooddale, and we were just looking around. Sherry has a lot of family in the Tri-Cities area, so Geneva, St. Charles, Naperville. So we are always kind of hovering around this area. One thing is kind of funny is as we were looking at Geneva, Sherry and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, man, this is kind of, and I hope nobody's from Geneva, but if you are, it is what it is. But we were like, man, this is kind of Stepford Wives type environment. I don't know if this is really the right community for us, right? But then we kind of came across Batavia, and there was just something that attracted me personally to Batavia. It was the old limestone buildings. We lived in Germany, and the old limestone buildings here kind of remind me of some of those small villages in Germany. And it was just something about Batavia. I couldn't really pin it, but there's just something about Batavia, right? So then it's that home buying experience. We were first-time home buyers, right? Being in the military for 23 years, we moved 12 times in 12 years because I was with some crazy special programs. So that whole home buying experience, for any of you that can think back to when you were first buying your first home, I mean, we went out, we must have looked at like 50 different homes. Some of the shockers were going into homes and they weren't ready for showing. I remember one house, we literally took one step in and immediately took a step back out and was like, what the heck, this house isn't even ready to be shown. And it was, you know, and they wanted an astronomical amount of money for it. We were just like, never mind. But anyway, we found a house, and this is just a little bit of a story in itself. We found a house. We're getting ready to close. And it was one of those, we were just so tired at this point of looking at homes that we're like, the heck with it. Let's just make an offer, and if it goes through, we'll get the house. Then that night, I don't know, it must have been late at night, Sherry wakes me up and is like, I found our house. I'm like, what are you talking about, right? So she was on Trulia or whatever, one of those real estate apps. She's like, this is our house. And you know what? I don't even have to look at this house. I just know that this is our home. And I was like, okay, but we're getting ready to close on this other one. And she's like, it doesn't matter. We don't need to close. Let's go look at this home. So the very next day, we looked at the home, and it was instantaneous. Like, we knew this was the home for us. So we're on the east side, right by Fermilab, a couple miles from the Fermilab entrance, and a great cul-de-sac, great community, great neighbors. Our couple neighbors are right here. And it's just awesome. We got a lot of veterans in our cul-de-sac. We got a lot of Leo, law enforcement in our cul-de-sac. It's just like a really cool little cul-de-sac that we have. So that's what brought us to Batavia. And once we settled into Batavia, being a veteran, I tend to scout the community looking for other veterans, right? So one of the first veterans I found out about was Karen, our neighbor, right? She's like, hey, I was Army. Oh, really? Awesome. So we had that small talk. And then as I'm like going through the community, I'm starting to see more and more veteran license plates, military license plates. You see the stickers on the back of the car, all the dead giveaways of military veterans. And I was like, man, there's a lot of veterans in this community, right? So I really feel like this was the right neighborhood for us. And then the patriotism of Batavia. I think everybody in this room cannot deny the strong patriotism we have here in Batavia. So my first exposure to that was with our middle son when he was at J.B. Nelson. So for those that don't know, J.B. Nelson Elementary School, Miss Avery leads the Veterans Day presentations every year. And every year they just get that much better. It is a phenomenal thing. I encourage all the veterans in this room, if you have an opportunity to go to J.B. Nelson for their Veterans Day Assembly, it brings me to tears every single time because, you know, they're our little kiddos, right? It's the 5th grade class, the 4th grade class. They do all these patriotic songs, and it's just a very nice thing to see that our public school system does here in Batavia. That, quite frankly, when I talk to a lot of my friends, a lot of my fellow CVs are like, man, my kids' schools don't do anything for Veterans Day. It's almost like just another day. So I think that's something we really have special here. Another thing that we have here in Batavia that I absolutely love is the Scouts and their flags over Batavia. So for certain holidays throughout the year, they're up to over 800 flags that they put out in the community. You pay once a year, 25 bucks or whatever, they stick the flag in the ground for certain holidays throughout the year. And our cul-de-sac, I think everybody on our cul-de-sac, with maybe the exception of one house, has purchased a flag. So when you turn on our cul-de-sac on those days, it's flags galore. So it's just another awesome patriotic thing that we have here in Batavia that I think all of us can be very proud of if you are Batavia residents. I know we have some people that came in from elsewhere, but if you're a Batavia resident, we have some really cool patriotic things here in this community that really, for me as a veteran, it just makes it that much more comforting to see. And then last but not least, I don't want to be, I'd be amiss if I did not mention Marty Callahan and our Flag Day Monument. So for those that may not be from Batavia, the founder of Flag Day was here in Batavia. He lived in Batavia, he worked in Batavia. So that's why Flag Day here in Batavia is really kind of a big deal. Like, we take that very seriously, Flag Day in Batavia. And Marty Callahan started an effort, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, to get a Flag Day memorial put up downtown Batavia. So if you haven't seen it, if you're familiar with downtown Batavia, where we're right here, right across from the main admin building of Batavia, you'll see a big flagpole with a big giant flag and like a brick wall around it. That's the Flag Day Memorial. And that was just put into play, I think it was 2 years ago now. So anyway, Flag Day Memorial. So we got all that out of the way. That's how we got to Batavia. and we love the community. So now, who are the Seabees? Well, Kristen kind of answered that a little bit at the beginning, right? Who are the Navy Seabees? I don't know how many times when I tell people I was in the Navy Seabees, most people are like, oh, what ships did you serve on? Well, I didn't go on ships. And that's usually the first deer in the headlights look. Then it's like, well, did you go on aviation when you're on planes? No, I didn't do that either. Then I get the second deer in the headlights look. It's, what did you do in the Navy? I was Seabees. We're construction. What? What are you talking about? So, back in World War II, the Chief of Bureau of Yard and Docks, Admiral Ben Morrell, saw a need to do forward operating construction to build forward operating bases, major airstrips, everything to support the war effort, and they needed construction workers. And back then, in 1942, the Seabees' average age was like 35, 40. They were pulling people straight from the construction companies that had been working construction their whole lives, putting weapons in their hand, giving them combat training, and saying, okay, you're going to build and you're going to war. And some of the Seabees' most monumental construction projects, if you will, were done during World War II. A lot of those facilities and airstrips that were built are still standing today, which is pretty awesome. But really, it was just construction workers, and we had a certain reputation. We still have a certain reputation as Navy Seabees to this day, but we had a certain reputation because they were construction workers, right? They were being pulled off their construction companies, they were given weapons, and they were told to go overseas and fight and build and fight. Our motto is, we build, we fight, and that's basically what it is. We are a defensive, not an offensive force, right? So we don't go looking for a fight, but if we come under attack, we are trained to protect ourselves and protect our construction that we're putting in place. So that's a key differentiator. But that's why we have a very close relationship with the Marine Corps. So Seabees and Marines, we always had this love-hate relationship thing. But at the end of the day, when the stuff hits the fan, Marines have Seabees backs, Seabees have Marines backs. Because we help them to continue to move forward by the construction that we do. And then after they move forward, one of the ongoing jokes with Seabees are, yeah, you guys like to blow stuff up. Because after we build a bridge to allow the Marines to move forward, then we have to destroy that bridge so the enemy cannot follow right behind and do some damage. So we'll build the bridge, Marines go across, and then we blow the bridge up. Don't ask me. But that's just the way it was back in World War II, right? That was the mission. So anyway, enough about that. My job in the Navy Seabees, I was a utilitiesman. So in Navy lingo, it's called a rate. So my job in the Navy was utilitiesman. So plumbing, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, water treatment, sewage treatment, the whole 9 yards. Went through school, graduated school, and then went out and did plumbing and HVAC. I did kind of go to advanced school for HVAC, so I kind of really specialized with heating, ventilation, air conditioning, but I still had that foundational training in plumbing and water treatment and sewage treatment. And in my last 5 years in the military, I was on special programs with Department of State diplomatic security. And what we did was we all held a top secret SCI clearance, and we handled all of these security systems for US embassies globally. So your access control, your vehicle barrier systems, your explosive detection systems, they call it TSCM, technical security countermeasures, all kinds of stuff. And that's where you kind of get into those conversations of, oh, you were a secret squirrel, you were doing all this secret squirrel stuff. Wasn't really a secret squirrel, but it was on the classified side, so there ain't a whole lot I could talk about. There's a chapter in the book about my State Department tour. I had to be super cautious on what I put in there because I had a clearance, and there's not a whole lot I could talk about. And it's funny, because Sherry would be like, you're so full of garbage, right? Because I'd be like, we'd be overseas and I'd have to do a mission and I'd be like, hey, I'm just going to do some locksmith work. And Sherry's like, man, you're so full of garbage. You're not just going out there to fix locks. I know you're doing some other stuff that you can't talk about. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to fix some locks. That's all I'm doing. That's all you need to know. So that was my State Department time. And so I'm kind of going totally off script, but that's all good. So why this book, right? So Kristen alluded to it, right? There's a couple reasons, right? As veterans, we always get into those conversations with the general public, right? Oh, you were a veteran. Yes, I was a veteran. How about yourself? I was not a veteran, but my grandmother, my granddad, my cousin, my brother, my sister, blah, 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 somebody served in my family. And then us being the veteran, we're always like, okay, tell me more. What did they do? What service were they in? 9 times out of 10, they're like, we don't really know. They never really talked about their service. Because veterans tend to be humble. We just don't, it's either humble or my brothers and sisters that really were in the crap, for lack of better words, during wartime, they don't want to really remember that stuff. So they don't want to share those stories. But those are stories that need to be told and heard. So, and then for my family, I was like, well, I don't want to do that for my own kids. I don't want my kids and my grandkids to be like, yeah, my granddad served, but I have no idea what he did. I just know he was in the Navy. Well, that's a loaded thing, right? Because I just talked about the Seabees and how kind of unique the Seabees are. So that was one of my main driving reasons behind this book, was just to put it in writing, memorialize my service for my current family, who pretty much, my oldest was the one that was with me during my time in the military. My middle son kind of caught the tail end of my service, and then our daughter came along after I was already out of service. But Nathan was the one that really took the brunt of the deployments. Those of you that are veterans can probably relate. I still remember when I was in the deployable units, we put out our camis and we get ready to deploy. And then one of my tours of duty that I talk about in the book was the Naval Academy, right? So in the Navy, we have what we call a seashore rotation. So it's not like you're constantly in a deployable unit for 20 years. You need a break, right? Or else you're never going to survive. So you do like 4 years in a deployable unit where you're deploying and you're going overseas, and then you do a shore duty. And that shore duty is you don't deploy, and it's almost like, dare I say, it's almost like a 9-to-5 job. And it just gives you time to decompress before you go back to another sea tour. So one of my shore duties was the Naval Academy. I was a facility manager for Bancroft Hall, which is the world's largest single dormitory in the world. And that was my introduction to facilities management, which is what I do now as a civilian. But I remember that there's a couple of times that I had to put on my camis. I don't remember what the reason was, but I had to put on my camis. Nathan was super young, super tiny, but I remember him just crying, and he thought I was deploying. As soon as he saw me put on those cami uniforms, he right away equated that to Daddy's leaving again. And I had to Sherry, I think, really was the one that explained to him, no, he's just going to work. He'll be home today at 4 o'clock. He's not going anywhere. But Nathan had that memorialized in his head that every time I put those camis on, it was because I was getting ready to deploy for 9 months. Seabees deploy for 9 months at a time, and then we're in garrison, which is home port, for 12 months. Of course, that fluctuates, right? We use the word semper gumby, always flexible. But for the most part, you're in home port for 12 months, you deploy for 9 months, in for home port 12 months, deploy for 9 months. So that was a little bit about that. And any veteran in here that has been through deployments with little ones, you know it's not easy. It's never easy. It's never easy saying bye to your spouse, and it's never easy saying bye to your kiddos, and then leaving them for 8-9 months. But anyway, the other reason why I wrote this book is really just to help overcome the stereotypes, right? Hollywood is not our friend. Social media is really not always our friend when it comes to military and veterans. They put out a lot of stereotypes. Even to this day, there's just tons and tons of stereotypes about veterans, right? Like, we all have, I'm gonna be totally honest, right? This is what I see in here. We all have PTSD. We're all gonna snap at any minute. We're very on edge, and we don't know how to relax. We don't know how to stay calm. No, that's not every single veteran. So another reason why I put this book out is because I never saw direct combat. And a lot of the media and the Hollywood will make you think that every single veteran's seen combat. It's actually the opposite. The majority of the people that serve don't see combat, with the exception of probably GWAT, right? Because that was a long, drawn-out war. But the majority of us have not really seen combat. But we do a lot of other things. And one thing that the Seabees are most known for is humanitarian and disaster recovery efforts. So my two impacting deployments that Kristen alluded to were exactly that. So back in 1993, it was the Haitians coming out of Haiti. There was a big crazy upheaval in Haiti. They were trying to seek refuge in Florida. Well, you don't just bring everybody in, right? You have to process them to make sure we're not bringing in criminals, to make sure we're not bringing in drugs and cartels. So our mission in the Seabees, or my unit, my battalion, at that time was to build tent cities in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, initially for what they predicted would be about 2,000 migrants. As soon as we landed there, within a month, that 2,000 number tripled to like 6,000. And it was just insane, the amount of migrants that were coming in. So our tasking started off with, tent city for 2,000, easy day. We got this. We'll be in and out of here within like 30 days. Not so much. We ended up being there for like 3 or 4 months, 5 months. Actually, no, it was longer than that. It was our whole deployment cycle we were there. So it was just 10 cities, about 10 cities, about 10 cities. And a funny story about that, there we go, I'm totally going off script now. But somebody did ask me to share some sea stories. One thing that was funny about, and if anybody's been to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and if anybody is a golfer, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the naval base, has a fantastic golf course. They pride themselves on the golf course. Well, when we were building these 10 cities, we were running out of land area. So we had to start moving to the golf course. The commanding officer of the base, which is kind of like the CEO of the base, was insistent that we do not build tents on his golf course. And we're like, okay, sir, but we're running out of room. Like, we still got more and more migrants coming in. We don't have enough tents to build for these people. So he's like, well, you can't do it on a golf course. So finally he lost that battle, but what we ended up doing was protecting the greens. So we put orange construction fencing around all the greens, and nobody could build around the greens. But everywhere else on the golf course, we built all these tents for this humanitarian mission for all the migrants. I talk about it in more detail in my book, but just remember I was young at that time, so I didn't truly appreciate what we were doing for the migrants. I was just seeing what I was seeing, and I was not happy. There was a lot of things that were being given to the migrants that I was getting frustrated about, because I'm like, man, we got people in the United States that are starving on the streets. We have people in the United States, we have people in the streets and they can't even get their next meal, and here we are giving these migrants like 2 hot meals a day. They were getting cigarettes, they were getting clothes, they were getting shoes, like all of this stuff. And me being young, I didn't appreciate that service aspect of what we were doing. I was just looking at it as, this is a bunch of garbage. Why are we doing this for the migrants when we have so many people here in the United States that we could be helping out with? So I'll leave it at that, but that was my first humanitarian mission. And then the second humanitarian mission, actually I was gonna read, I guess I'll try to get back to my script a little bit. So let's back up a little bit. So I wrote this book all on my own. Is there any authors in the book, in the audience, any authors or any wannabe authors or anybody who's thought about writing? Awesome. So I'm cheap. I'll be honest, I'm cheap. So I was like, if I'm gonna write a book, I'm gonna do it all on my own. I'm not gonna use a publisher. I'm not gonna shell out thousands and thousands of dollars using a publisher, and I'm just gonna do it all on my own. So I started writing, used MS Word at the beginning. Quickly found out it's not easy to write a book in MS Word because MS Word is not really set up for book formatting. So indentations, chapter divisions, all this crazy stuff that you learn about as you're designing your book. MS Word just wasn't cutting it. So I found out about Kindle Create, which feeds into Kindle Direct Publishing, which is Amazon's kind of e-publishing book, and it helps authors publish their book on their own without having to use a formal publishing company. So I used Kindle, and once I shifted over to Kindle Create, everything was formatted for me for the most part. But there's a lot that goes into writing a book, as you could probably allude to, right? A lot of things, it's more than just the writing. So the writing is challenging in itself. You have a lot of thoughts in your head, but I don't know how many times I would start writing and I would just, they call it writer's block, we're all familiar. Totally just, I can't get it out of my head and put it on paper. So that was a challenge. Or you would get those spurts at like old dark 100. Like 0 to 100 in the morning, I'm getting up. Oh, I gotta write these thoughts down, right? Sherry's like, what the hell are you doing? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Sorry, I gotta get these words down before I forget. So the whole writing process is a journey in itself. But then it comes into the details of the design of the book. How do you want to present the book? The font style, the font size. So for me, when I was designing the book, I came here to the library, I was holding different sized books in my hand. All this stuff that I never thought about until I was in it. But it makes a difference, right? Like, hold different sized books in your hand and you'll see what I'm talking about. I wanted something that was not too long of a read. We have a lot of senior military officers that put out memoirs that are like over 1,000 pages. I was like, I'm not about that. I don't think anybody really reads those books cover to cover anyway. I wanted something that somebody could read on a plane as they're maybe traveling for work. They get halfway through the book on their travel to, and then they finish the book on their travel back. So it's something that would easily be able to put in a carry-on. And then I was also cognizant of the vision impaired, right? A lot of my sisters and brothers, including me, our vision ain't what it used to be. So I would do a couple of proofs. The font was too small, right? I'm like, this is just not going to work. The font's way too small. People are not going to be able to read it. So, do you do double space? Do you do 1.5 space? Do you do 1.75 space? All this crazy stuff that I'm sure if I used a publishing company, they would just bang it out and be like, here you go, man, you're good to go. But all this I had to do on my own. And then the other key thing with Amazon Direct Publishing is you're your own marketer. They have some tools, but for the most part, I had to do all my own marketing. So working up to that publishing date, and like I said, we don't have a lot of authors in here, but working up to that publishing date is a journey in itself as well, right? So I'm like going through all these edits, going through all these proofs. Sherry was my editor and proofreader. I know that some people say, you really shouldn't have family or friends do your proofreading or do your editing, but I know Sherry. And I know that she is the most honest person, brutally honest person I know. And when something looks jacked up, she's going to tell me, you need to rewrite that. That's not the way, I know what you're trying to say, Randy, but the way you have it worded right now, it's not coming across like you want it to. And being a writer, I'm not going to lie, there were some times where that construction criticism, I would get upset. I'd be like, no, this is what I want to say. And Sherry's like, no, I'm telling you, you do not want to say it that way. You need to reword it. So we had a little bit of that back and forth. Eventually I'll rewrite it. And then once I rewrote it, looking back, she was absolutely right. Like, she was absolutely right. If I would have kept it the way it was, it probably wouldn't have gotten the same message. So the writing experience is all in itself, but the design, and then, like I was saying, with Amazon, you have to market your own book. So Nathan will get a kick out of this. So we'd just be going out, I don't know, talking to family or friends or whatever, and some topic would come up that's written about in my book. And I'd be like, hey, I read about that in my book. Did you get a copy of my book yet? It's going to be published. And Nathan's like, Dad, what the hell are you doing, man? I'm like, come on, you got to market the book. Like, it's going to be published in March. I got to work up to it. So that was always kind of funny. Nathan would just get a chuckle out of me. He's like, come on, Dad, you're like a walking salesperson for your book. And I'm like, hey, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? You gotta market it when you can. So that's a little bit more about that, into publishing and all of that. Amazon is really good with it. Setting price is another thing I won't even get into, but just trying to figure out what you want to set for price. And then one thing I have, it's proving to be a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. So I did have a lot of veterans come to me and say, hey man, you should really put this in an audiobook. And I'm like, man, I didn't even think about that, right? So I don't want to necessarily get into diversity. No, we can't. So it really has to do with diversity and inclusion, right? Like, I want everybody to be able to read my book, not just those people that have all 5 senses. So if somebody is vision impaired, if somebody is, I forgot what they call it when the words are flipped backwards when they read, and dyslexic, thank you. I want them to still be able to enjoy my book. So I'm really trying to figure out the audiobook thing, but the challenge has been with the audiobook is finding the right voice for it. That is something that I, again, never really thought about. So I listened to all these different audio authors that are out there. They do these little snippets of a recording. And I'm just like, no, that's not the right sounding voice for my story. So it's interesting, like all these little intricacies about writing and publishing a book and then doing the audio side. I've had people say, look, a lot of people like when their own author reads their own book. And I'm like, okay, that's an idea. I read my own book, but what worries me about that is I'll start ad-libbing and throwing in words, and instead of just reading it word for word as I wrote it, I'll start ad-libbing and throwing stuff in there because that's what I love to do, like I am doing right now, completely off script. But that worries me too. But then at least that would be the true voice of me saying my story. So I don't know, more to come on the audiobook. If anybody has experience with audiobooks, please, I welcome your suggestions or your advice, because I really would love to get an audiobook. Even my sister-in-law has said, I would rather have it be an audiobook. She has like an hour or hour and a half long commute to work. She's like, that'd be the perfect time for me to listen to your book is when I'm commuting to and from work. So hopefully I'll get an audiobook. All right. The book itself, why did I do it, or dare I say, is it worth it, right? 14, 15 months writing, rewriting, proofing, reading, rewriting. Is it worth it? I would just say this, a few points, and it kind of skims through the whole book. If this book helps just one of my fellow Seabees be that much more proud, or any veteran for that matter, just be that much more proud of their service, it's all been worth it. If I'm able to help the general public better understand what it means to serve in any capacity, it doesn't always necessarily need to be military, then it's worth it. If it helps any of my brothers and sisters with their own military transition from military to corporate world, because I also have a chapter all about that, all the trials and tribulations of getting into corporate America and marketing yourself and selling yourself so you can get a good second solid career outside of the military. If my book helps any of my sisters and brothers with their own transition and they successfully land a second career post-military, it's worth it. If it helps any husband out there rethink their relationship with their wife, chapter 7, it's worth it. There is a lot of emotion in some of these chapters when I wrote them. Chapter 7 is definitely one of them. The humanitarian stuff is another. And then if it makes one dad just kind of rethink their role as a dad, it's worth it. I've not been the best at that. I will openly stand here and say that right now. I have not been the best at that. There was a lot of away time. I did a total of, I don't know if I said, so I did a total of 9 deployments, right? And Nathan, I think, was suscept to maybe 4? You lose track. I think Nathan was suscept to like 4 deployments, right? So from the time he was knee-high to a grasshopper to maybe, I wasn't around much, right? I deployed a lot. And we've had to make up for a lot of lost time. We're still doing it to this day. So anyway, just be a dad. Do your duty, be a dad, and understand your responsibility to your kids. If people can have a better understanding of that, then the book was worth it. All right. How are we doing on time? All right, I'm going to do a couple excerpt readings, and then we'll go from there. We'll do like a Q&A. So, the tsunami of 2004. Does anybody remember the tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004? It hit right before Christmas. So, I have a chapter on that, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Bear with me because I went off script, so now all my marks are messed up. I had to put on my readers because my eyes are not as good as they used to be. Okay. Chapter 9, 2004 Indian Ocean Tsunami. It was October of 2004, and immediately following my pinning ceremony that advanced me in rank to Chief Petty Officer, I was assigned as the Operations Chief for a detail of 50 Seabees. This assignment as Operations Chief would prove to be a great personal lesson on leadership and motivating troops, especially considering the fact that I was a new chief. We were in Homeport, quote on garrison. What this means in military lingo is we were in the United States for our training and administration period. For the command I was assigned, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 40, our home port was Port Hueneme, California. I think it is also necessary to explain the deployment cycle when assigned to an NMCB. Typical rotation is 12 months in home port, 7 to 8 months deployed. As it happens sometimes, when drawing near to that deployment, the command will receive word of where they will be deploying. And quite honestly, when some hear of where that will be, many become quite emotional. For our detachment, we received word that we would be going to Iraq. This was during global war on terrorism. Specifically, we were going to Camp Anaconda. Camp Anaconda was also known as Camp Mortarville because of the daily but highly ineffective mortar attacks that occurred. Some of the Seabees on this detail became quite emotional. Some did not want to go to war, plain and simple. They joined the military for other reasons and did not foresee having to go to war. As crazy as that may seem, this is what happens sometimes when reality hits and service members realize that war is real and that we are now going to be a part of it. As the operations chief, I was the one the Seabees would come to when they needed to vent or air their concerns. I remember a few that were downright scared to go to Iraq. I do not blame them. No one wants to go to war. And quite frankly, it is not something that excites anyone in the military. I'll ad-lib, contrary to popular belief, thanks to the media. No, military, we don't like going to war. I'm sorry. But we do have our duty to uphold, and when duty calls, you must answer that call. As it were, it took time to deal with the initial emotions of the Seabees and get them to accept the fact that we were going into harm's way, aka, quote unquote, going to war. There's more to this chapter, but you're probably wondering, how does that relate to the tsunami? Because basically how it goes in the Seabees is, those orders got redacted, they said, never mind, you're not going to Iraq, forget that. You're now just going to deploy to Okinawa, Japan, and we'll figure out what to do with the 50-man detachment once we get to Okinawa, Japan. But you're not going to Iraq. You can only imagine all of the emotional madness that occurred, because it took us a while to get people motivated to go to Iraq, and now all of a sudden, never mind, we're not going after all. Thanks for all your efforts in getting ready, but we're not going. So that's kind of what happened there, and now let's get into the actual tsunami. Did I get my numbers right? From what I remember, we deployed, how are we doing that? Okay. I'll try to read a little faster. From what I remember, we deployed around November of 2004. Soon thereafter, December 26th to be exact, we heard of a massive tsunami that went through the Indian Ocean and completely devastated everything in its path. We immediately had a strong feeling that we would now be going there to assist with disaster recovery efforts. The Navy Seabees are well known for our strong capabilities in disaster recovery and humanitarian missions. Due to our vast construction skills and having access to heavy construction equipment, it is a no-brainer that when major disasters strike, Seabees will be called to action. And this is exactly what happened. We were given our operations order to deploy to Banda Aceh, Indonesia, to support the disaster recovery efforts. A little known fact about the Navy Seabees is we are trained to deploy within 72 hours, about 3 days of any deployment order. So as soon as we received the official word of our mission, we went immediately into embarkation mode. As the operations chief, I was responsible for the hour-by-hour activities to ensure that the troops were ready, the CEAS, which is the Civil Engineering Support Equipment, which is just a fancy way of saying bulldozers, dump trucks, you got the idea, was prepped for embarkation. Reports were being drafted, and all other administrative and operational taskings needed to deploy our unit were completed. To move a unit of 50 Seabees is a coordinated effort among many stakeholders, both within the deploying unit and the supporting elements. And as you can imagine, it's a 24/7 operation. Now we'll skip again, because I'm not reading an entire chapter. All right, so this is now, I go through the chapter, I talk about some of the things that we've seen and done, and this is kind of a little bit in summary. One of the main things that added to the emotion of us Seabees during this humanitarian mission, I should have preempted this a little bit. Okay, this is gonna kind of get, it's not gory, but it'll make you think. Okay. One of the main things that added to the emotions of us Seabees during this humanitarian mission was the fact that the majority of the victims were women and children. This hit us especially hard. We were the only military unit that were going as far inland as we were. We really saw much more death than any of us anticipated, and it was just emotionally draining. Going off script a little bit, 7 days a week, working about 20 hours a day, just going in and doing disaster recovery. This is something you cannot prepare for mentally. I told my Seabees before we deployed into the region that this was going to be different for them. Performing humanitarian missions is not like going to war. It takes a different mindset. They quickly realized what I had meant when they started seeing the deceased women and children that were everywhere. Whole families were wiped out, for lack of better terms. I remember one time an older gentleman came up to me and in very broken English stated that he was the only person left in his entire family tree. It took me a while to understand what he was trying to tell me, but once I did, I just could not believe it. His whole family tree was gone, deceased, and he was the sole survivor. Can you imagine that? How do you console someone after they tell you something like that? It was just crazy and emotionally draining. But I do not want to end this chapter on a low, however. One thing that was awesome to witness was the strength of the human spirit. day that we went inland to perform our mission, we were met with smiles. Yes, that is right, smiles. These people lost everything and had to rebuild their lives from scratch, but they still found reason to smile. That spoke loudly to me and has stuck with me to this day. Whenever I'm having a bad day or work is getting stressful, I think back to those smiles among the death and devastation and just give myself a bit of a reality check. If they were able to find joy in all of their despair, in all of their loss, why can't I when faced with stress or just plain old corporate shenanigans? For anybody that's worked in corporate, you know how they go. It was truly inspiring to see that human spirit among all the devastation. In summary, just to give an idea of that tsunami for those that may not know. I want to share some facts about the tsunami that will put this mission into better perspective for all whom are reading this. Number one, the waves came ashore in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, topped 100 feet. The tsunami's waves traveled across the Indian Ocean at 500 miles per hour. The Indonesia earthquake caused a shift in the Earth's mass, changing the planet's rotation. Death toll in Banda Aceh, Indonesia was in excess of 100,000. And that's what we were. We were right in Indonesia. So 100,000 mass graves. That's what it was, mass graves. It was one of the deadliest natural disasters in recent history. The earthquake that initiated the tsunami was measured between 9.1 and 9.3 magnitude and was the third largest earthquake since 1900. So those were my two mandatory missions. The tsunami was the more impactful one. If I must be transparent and honest, that was the one that Sherry said, after that deployment, Sherry said, Randy, you're not the same person. She's like, I don't know what happened over there. I don't want to know what happened over there, but you're just not the same Randy that I knew before that mission. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to get into the whole thing about PTSD and stuff, but I will just say when you are surrounded by so much death like that, it does have an impact on you. But one thing that Sherry told me, I just remembered this. God, thank you for the words. One thing Sherry did tell me after all that, she was like, you know, I think I was having a bad day and I was talking about it. I was like, man, you just don't know the crap that we saw when we were there. But Sherry, you know, all the mass graves, right, and all the bodies. Sherry turned to me and said something along the lines of, look, Randy, you were doing God's work. You were like angels to them. Like you were finding people's mothers, wives, children, and they were able to be appropriately put to rest. And if you weren't there doing that, the bodies would have just rotted away in the mud. And that kind of hit home, right? So I guess we were kind of doing, God's work is a bit of a stretch, but you know, we did some things there, and I guess we were angels to the Indonesians. They have since totally recovered. Anybody who searches Banda Aceh nowadays, you'll know that they're totally rebuilt now. Everything is back to normal. Okay, I totally went off script. Totally went off what I was going to talk about, but I hope I made an impression with everybody today. I hope I gave you some information about the Navy Seabees, what we're all about, a little about me and my great family in the back, the struggles that military families go through, especially when you do the long haul career. I did 23 years, 9 deployments. It's not an easy career choice. And the spouses and the families serve just as equally, if not more, than the military member themselves. Thank you everybody again for coming out today. I truly appreciate everybody being here and taking time out of your day to listen to a little bit about me and my story. And at this point, I just kind of open it up to any questions you may have about the book, about Seabees, whatever.
So my dad was 25 in 1940, just got married. He wanted to join the Seabees. He worked for locomotive in the range, but they rejected him. The reason given was that he was too valuable in the plant. They were making tank parts. What are or were the qualifications to be a Seabee, and what were your skills needed?
They were really looking for just construction trades, electricians, and anybody who could fight for themselves, right? So they had to be physically fit. I mean, I say that very loosely because Seabees come in all shapes, sizes, and forms, especially back in World War II. But I don't think there was really like super strict requirements because they just needed construction workers at that point.
Well, he was a maintenance man.
Yeah, but it sounds like his company sounds like maybe the one that was like, no, we can't let him go for whatever reason. I don't know, and I don't know how you would win that fight against Uncle Sam. I mean, if Uncle Sam says, no, we're taking him, we don't really care about your company. Yeah, it seems like a very unusual kind of story because it sounds like it was his company that was saying, no, we can't let this guy go. He's our main guy.
Locomotive was a division of General Motors.
Yeah.
And they were making tank parts, my dad told me at that time. So maybe they thought he was more valuable there.
Yeah.
But I thought, you know, if they need these people so bad, they can find anybody else to work in the plant, let him go.
Right. Yeah, maybe he had a special skill set. You know, maybe he had a special skill set that was needed to do whatever he was doing for the tanks and for that mission of building those tanks.
So if you're walking and breathing, they take you, right?
But really, I mean, back then it was literally like, hey, you know, they came in all shapes, sizes, and forms. We weren't like Marines, like we weren't diehard physically fit back in World War II. But we did have to have enough to be able to carry a 60 or a 50. I was a 60 gunner for 3 years. I was a 50 gunner for a year and a half. Those things aren't light, right? The 60 gun, that thing is a heavy sucker. Luckily, I was in my 20s back then, so I was able to carry it around. But you know, you got to be able to run. You got to be able to do your patrols and all that. So we trained with the Marines and all that. So.
Is it all male?
No, not anymore. Actually, that's a story in itself that I didn't even talk about in my book. I won't get into it because we're running out of time. But I was in the battalion when the first females started coming into the battalion. I don't know if this is the right audience for this. My battalion's logo had a beaver in it. As soon as the females started coming to the battalion, we had to get rid of the beaver in the logo. I'll just leave it at that. Just leave it at that. But I can tell you, that caused a lot of ruckus amongst the ranks. We were on deployment, we're like, bring back our original logo, this is crazy.
Did you sign up right out of high school? Or
Yes.
Did you do something? You signed up.
Yes, I actually come from a military family, again, that's talked about in the book. My first chapter is all about a little bit of my upbringing. I come from a very military-heavy family. My stepfather was Navy, my brother was Navy, my cousin was Navy, my other cousin was Army. Sherry's side of the family is military as well. Her dad was Navy, her uncle and godfather was Navy. So, and I think you guys, the brain fart now, but anyway, we have a lot of military. So for me, you can read about it in the book, but basically it was, at age 18, you're out of this house. Figure it out. That's actually my opening line of the book. At age 18, you're out of the house, figure it out. So I just joined the Navy. Little did I know who the Seabees were at the time when I joined. I didn't really know who the Seabees were, but I learned really quickly who the Seabees are. I learned really quickly about the sense of pride that we have as Seabees, all that fun stuff. All right, any more questions? I know we're at the top of the hour. Go ahead, sir.
One quickie with I was with the chaplain with the Marines for about 7 years, and we went to Somalia back in 93, 92,
Yep.
93. And of course, we were there first, and then all of a sudden, the Seabees showed up with all this equipment. I mean, it was just bulldozers, all kinds of stuff, road graders. And so the Seabees took over, and they didn't have a chaplain at the time, so I was able to go over and do some services for the Seabees. So that was my only example of serving with the Seabees, but they just really took over the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was quite impressive.
That's pretty much what we do. The tsunami, we had a lot of political restraints, but that's pretty much what we do. We just come in with our equipment and take care of business and move on. All right. Thank you all for your,
One more question.
oh,
Go ahead, ma'am. Want to raise your hand?
Oh, yeah, I have my.
I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if your young feelings about your service to migrants changed, and if so, was it a long process, or was it something like the Smiles that helped you understand how important that service was?
I think the old saying goes, with age comes wisdom, right? You know, at the time, especially the 93 mission, the tsunami was a whole different ballgame because I was older, I was a senior enlisted, I was the chief petty officer in charge, so that one I knew from day one what we were doing, and what we were doing was for the betterment of humanity. But the Haitian thing and some of the things I was saying, you know, looking back, it was all superficial, materialistic stuff that I was getting spun up about that was really kind of silly of me to get spun up about. But I was young, you know, and I'm just like, man, I can't believe these Haitians, you know, they're getting these, you know, free cigarettes, and, you know, they were getting hot meals, but then they were complaining about the hot food. You know, the food isn't what we thought it was going to be. We thought we were really getting better food. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just appreciate what we're giving you. Why are you, you know, so it's just being young and kind of more naive to the whole service aspect of that. But now that I look back, I mean, and I'm sure, I talk about it in my book, I'm sure there's plenty of Haitians in the United States that came through during that time, came through Guantanamo Bay, came into Florida, established their home, established their family, and they are productive citizens for the United States. And I would love to hear some of those stories from some of those Haitians that say, yeah, I was part of that 1994 migration thing, and I am so you know, grateful that I was able to come to the United States and build a life for myself and my family.
I noticed from reading the book, you sometimes you bring up where God, you felt God moving you in these things. Is this like an all-time thing, or did it like one day you woke up and said, wow, God is in my life? Or because I read that it's very important to you.
I think that sometimes it is, I literally will wake up and get a thought where I feel like, okay, that's God speaking to me. This isn't just me getting up and thinking for myself. Other times it's been more of a longer, prolonged thing. Like, I still think about the tsunami. I still have dreams about that. There's certain incidences that happened, I write about in the book with the tsunami, that I just have to constantly think back to what, honestly, what Sherry told me, right? We were there, we were kind of angels for those people, and even though we saw so much death and destruction, we were doing good for the betterment of humanity. And I think that's all that, whatever your belief is, that's really all we're here to do, right? We're just here to better each other and better humanity. That's the way God would want it.
I just want to first apologize for being late on issues, but I also want to thank everybody who served in this room, because I know there's a few of you that did actually serve. My husband was in the Navy. I lost him 2 years ago, so I know what it's like to have military ties. My brother, eldest, was Air Force. Second eldest is Green Beret. Youngest is Army. So I too come from military family, and his wives and sisters of military. You're right when you say we go through stuff, because you just don't know from day to day what's going to happen. And you just pray to God every moment that you're awake, that our loved, our husbands and brothers, or sisters and wives are safe. But thank you, sir. Thank you to all of you who did serve our country. God bless you, and God bless your families.
Sorry, Kristen, for running over.
Thank you. Hope to see you next month.